The iron bars were cold beneath Dr. Elias Thornbury's weathered hands as he pressed his face closer to peer into the dim cell. March wind howled through Boston's asylum corridors, carrying with it the salt smell of the harbor and something else, the acrid smoke from whale oil lamps that never quite masked the building's darker odors. Inside the cell, a small figure rocked back and forth on the stone floor, her tattered dress gray in the flickering light. The girl couldn't have been more than 12 years old, her dark hair matted and wild, her feet bare despite the March cold. But it was her voice that had drawn Elias here on this freezing evening in 1780, the strange, rhythmic sounds that echoed through the asylum's halls like nothing he'd heard in 40 years of studying dead languages. She sang now, a lilting melody that seemed to spiral upward and down again, words that flowed like water over river stones. Her small hands moved as she sang, fingers tracing symbols in the dust and grime of the floor with methodical precision. They say she hasn't spoken a word of English since Captain Vale brought her in 3 days ago, the asylum keeper muttered behind Elias, his keys jangling at his belt. Mad as a March hare, that one. Probably simple-minded from birth. The Reverend says we should just quiet, Elias whispered, his heart beginning to pound in his chest with a feeling he hadn't experienced in decades. The girl's song had shifted, and in that shift he heard something impossible, a cadence, a structure that tickled at the edges of his memory like a half-remembered dream. The girl stopped suddenly, her head snapping up to look directly at Elias. Her eyes were dark and ancient in her young face, and for a moment he felt as though he were staring not at a child but at something far older. She raised one thin finger and pointed at him, then opened her mouth and spoke a single word with crystal clarity. "Tarn it!" The floor seemed to drop beneath Elias's feet. His vision swam. 40 years of scholarship, 40 years of decoding forbidden texts in Vatican basements during his youth, 40 years of being dismissed as a dusty relic by his younger colleagues at Harvard, and here, in a Boston asylum, a 12-year-old girl had just spoken the name of a goddess dead for 2,000 years. "Tarn it," she repeated, and then launched into a rapid string of sounds that made the hair on Elias's neck stand on end. The phonetic structure, the grammar, the way her tongue formed the consonants, it was Punic, the language of ancient Carthage, a civilization that Rome had ground into dust in 146 BC. A language that should exist only in fragments on broken pottery and crumbling stone. Dr. Thornbury. The keeper's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Sir, are you quite well? You've gone pale as death." Elias gripped the bars tighter, his mind racing. This was impossible. Even if some scholar had somehow taught this girl ancient Punic, which itself was absurd, she spoke it with the fluency of a native speaker. She spoke it the way someone speaks their mother tongue, with all the subtle variations and naturalness that no amount of study could replicate. "I need to speak with her," Elias said, his voice hoarse. "Alone?" The keeper laughed, a harsh bark that echoed off the stone walls. "Speak with her? Sir, she don't speak nothing but gibberish. The Reverend Blackwood himself examined her yesterday. Said she's possessed by demons, or simple-minded, or both. Either way, she's bound for the madhouse proper once the paperwork's sorted." Nevertheless, Elias turned to face the keeper, and something in his expression must have conveyed the urgency he felt, because the man's smirk faltered. "I am still a professor at Harvard University, and I am making a formal request to examine this child. Unless you'd prefer I bring this matter to the colonial authorities." The keeper grumbled but produced his key ring. 5 minutes, then. And I'll be right outside. Some of us remember when you were somebody important, Dr. Thornbury, but that was a long time ago. These days, the Reverend's word carries more weight than some old book collectors. The cell door swung open with a screech of protesting hinges. Elias stepped inside, his expensive shoes, now worn at the heels, like so much of his life, crunching on the gritty floor. The girl watched him approach, but she didn't flinch or cower. Instead, she tilted her head with an expression that was almost curious. Elias lowered himself carefully to the floor, his old knees protesting. He sat across from the girl, leaving a respectful distance between them, and placed his hands palm up on his lap in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peace. "My name is Elias," he said softly. Then, drawing on memories from texts he'd translated decades ago in dusty Roman archives, he attempted something he never thought he'd try with a living person. He spoke in Punic, the words feeling strange and ancient in his mouth. "I am a friend. I want to help you." The girl's eyes widened. Her mouth opened in surprise, and for a moment she simply stared at him. Then tears began to stream down her dirty cheeks, and she launched into a torrent of words so rapid that Elias could only catch perhaps 1 in 5. But those words he did catch made his blood run cold. She was speaking about fire. About screaming. About people in dark robes coming in the night. About running through woods until her feet bled, about hiding in a ship's hold among the rats and filth, about the terrible silence that came after the burning. "Slowly, child," Elias said, his own voice shaking. "Please, slowly. My knowledge of your tongue is limited." The girl took a shuddering breath and seemed to collect herself. When she spoke again, it was more measured, though her small hands trembled. She pointed to herself and said something that sounded like martyr. Then she pointed to him and repeated his name. "Elias." "Yes," he breathed. "Yes, I'm Elias." "And you're Martha." He used the anglicized version of her name, and she nodded, accepting it. Martha reached down and began scratching symbols in the dirt with her fingernail, not the idle doodles of a child, but precise, deliberate markings. Elias watched in mounting horror as he recognized them. They were Carthaginian script, the written form of Punic. But more than that, they were specific prayers. Death prayers. The kind inscribed on tombs and memorial stones, words meant to guide the deceased to the afterlife and plead with the gods for mercy. In 40 years of studying dead languages, Elias whispered to himself in English, "I've never heard one begging so desperately to live." Martha looked up at him, her eyes boring into his. She spoke again, and this time Elias caught enough to understand the essence. She was asking if he was one of them. One of the men in dark robes who came with fire and death. "No," Elias said firmly, reverting to English because he didn't have the Punic vocabulary to express what he needed to say. "No, child. I'm here to help you. I'm here to understand." The cell door opened behind them. "Time's up, Dr. Thornbury," the keeper announced. "Reverend Blackwood's here to see you." Elias turned to find the keeper standing aside, and behind him in the corridor stood one of Boston's most influential men. Reverend Josiah Blackwood cut an imposing figure even in the asylum's dim light, tall, broad-shouldered, his white collar gleaming against his black robes, his face a mask of benevolent concern that didn't quite reach his cold gray eyes. "Elias," Blackwood said with a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. "I heard you'd come to examine our young mystery. Still tilting at windmills in your twilight years, I see." Elias struggled to his feet, his knees popping audibly. Behind him, he could hear Martha scuttling backward until her shoulders hit the stone wall. "Josiah, I was just wasting your time with a disturbed child's ramblings." Blackwood stepped into the cell, his presence somehow making the small space feel even more confined. "My dear friend, I know you've devoted your life to the study of antiquities, but surely even you can see that this poor creature is simply mad. Her mind has broken under whatever trauma she experienced. These sounds she makes, they're nothing more than the babbling of a damaged mind. I don't think, Elias began, but Blackwood held up one elegant hand. The masters of the asylum have already made their determination. The girl will be transferred to the permanent wing tomorrow morning. I've arranged for her care personally. The Crown has enough problems without adding the burden of a lunatic child to the public coffers. Blackwood's smile widened slightly. Now, I hate to cut short your academic curiosity, but I'm afraid I must insist you leave this to those better equipped to handle such unfortunate cases. After all, an old fool chasing phantoms in a disturbed child's ramblings, perhaps it's time Harvard found you a quiet retirement, Elias. The words hit like a slap. Elias felt his cheeks burn with humiliation and anger. Around Harvard's halls, he knew what the younger professors said about him. That he was past his prime. That he clung to his position out of stubbornness rather than relevance. That his best work was decades behind him. To hear such sentiments from Blackwood, who Elias had known since the man was a young divinity student, cut deeper than it should have. I see, Elias said quietly. He looked back at Martha, who had pressed herself into the corner, her eyes fixed on Blackwood with an expression of pure terror. And what of the girl's welfare? Who speaks for her? I do, came a woman's voice from the corridor. And I'd like to know why the Reverend is so eager to lock away a child who's harmed no one. Mrs. Sarah Hartley swept into the cell with the confidence of a woman who'd delivered half of Boston's babies and wasn't intimidated by religious authority. She was 55 and made no apologies for the gray in her hair or the lines around her eyes. Her dress was practical wool, her hands work roughened, and her gaze sharp as a surgeon's knife as she looked between Blackwood and Elias. Sarah, Blackwood said, his smile faltering slightly. I didn't expect to find you here this evening. I run the orphanage, Josiah. Someone reported a child in distress. I came. Sarah moved past both men and knelt beside Martha, not crowding her but establishing a gentle presence. Hello, sweetheart. I'm Mrs. Hartley. I help children who have nowhere else to go. She spoke slowly, clearly, with a warmth that needed no translation. Martha's terrified expression softened slightly. She said something in Punic, and though Sarah couldn't understand the words, she nodded as if she could. This child needs care, not imprisonment, Sarah said, looking up at Blackwood. If she's an orphan, as Captain Vale's report suggests, then she falls under my purview. I'll take responsibility for her. That's highly irregular, Blackwood began. So is a reverend taking personal interest in committing a child to permanent asylum care, Sarah interrupted. Unless there's something about this girl you're not telling us. For just a moment, something flickered in Blackwood's eyes, something dark and dangerous that was quickly hidden behind his ministerial mask. Of course not. I'm simply concerned for the child's well-being. And for poor Dr. Thornbury's reputation. You know how the other professors talk, Sarah. They already think him eccentric. If word spreads that he's attributing ancient languages to asylum inmates, well. The threat hung in the air. Elias felt his jaw clench. Blackwood was right about one thing, his position at Harvard was more tenuous than ever. The younger faculty were already maneuvering to claim his office, his salary, his few remaining teaching duties. If he appeared to be losing his mental faculties, chasing fantasies of ancient Carthaginians in colonial Boston. But then Martha spoke again, that one word that had started everything. Darn it! And Elias made his choice. I'm taking the girl's case to the colonial authorities, he said firmly. And I'm requesting a formal hearing on her status. As a Harvard professor, I have that right. Blackwood's expression hardened. "You're making a mistake, Elias. A foolish, prideful mistake that will cost you what little standing you have left." "Perhaps," Elias said. "But I've made worse mistakes in my life. At least this one serves truth rather than convenience." The Reverend stared at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Very well. But remember I warned you." He turned to leave, his black robe swirling dramatically, then paused at the door. "One more thing, Elias. You might want to be more careful with your library. I've noticed you've been careless with some rather valuable volumes lately. It would be a shame if anything were to happen to your collection." Then he was gone, his footsteps echoing down the corridor like a pronouncement of doom. Sarah stood and brushed off her skirts. "Well," she said dryly, "I haven't seen Josiah Blackwood that unsettled since the widow Morrison accused him of watering down the communion wine. What exactly is going on here, Elias?" Elias looked at Martha, who was watching him with those ancient eyes, and then at Sarah. "I'm not entirely sure," he admitted. "But I think this child may be the most important person in Boston right now. And I think Reverend Blackwood knows it." "Important how?" "That," Elias said slowly, "is what I intend to find out." The walk from the asylum to Sarah's orphanage took 20 minutes through Boston's narrow, winding streets. Night had fallen completely now, and the city was a maze of shadows broken only by the occasional lamp glowing in a window or the larger flames of street torches. British soldiers patrolled in pairs, their red coats dark as blood in the uncertain light, their muskets gleaming. Martha walked between Elias and Sarah, her small hand clutched tightly in the older woman's grip. She flinched at every loud noise, every sudden movement. When a group of drunken sailors stumbled past, singing a ribald song, she pressed herself against Sarah's skirts and made a sound low in her throat like a frightened animal. "Easy, child," Sarah murmured. "You're safe now. I promise you're safe." Elias wasn't so sure. The confrontation with Blackwood had left him deeply unsettled. The Reverend's interest in Martha seemed far too personal, too urgent. And that comment about Elias's library, that had sounded very much like a threat. The orphanage was a 3-story wooden building near the waterfront, its paint peeling but its windows warm with light. Sarah had inherited it from her late husband, who'd been a ship's surgeon before fever took him 5 years ago. She'd transformed it from their family home into a refuge for the city's unwanted children, funding it through a combination of her own inheritance, charity donations, and sheer stubborn will. Inside, the smell of boiling oats and bread welcomed them. A dozen children of various ages looked up from their evening activities, sewing, reading by candlelight, helping with chores, as Sarah ushered Martha through the door. "Everyone, this is Martha," Sarah announced. "She'll be staying with us. She's had a very difficult time, so I want you all to be especially kind and patient with her. She doesn't speak English yet, but I'm sure she'll learn." The children nodded solemnly. They were used to new arrivals who came bearing trauma. In 1780 Boston, with war and disease and poverty constantly churning through the population, orphans were as common as rats. Sarah led Martha upstairs to a small room with 2 beds, a wash basin, and a single window overlooking the street. "You'll share with Patience," Sarah explained, gesturing to one of the beds. "She's 7, and she's quiet as a mouse. Won't bother you at all." Martha stood in the center of the room, looking lost and small and utterly exhausted. Sarah helped her wash, noting with clinical precision the dirt under her nails, the bruises on her arms, the strange pattern of scars on her back that looked almost surgical. "Elias," Sarah called quietly. "Come look at this." Elias stepped into the room and felt his breath catch as Sarah showed him Martha's scars. They were precise, deliberate marks arranged in a geometric pattern, not the random wounds of abuse but something intentional, almost ritualistic. "I've seen marks like this before," Sarah said slowly, her voice troubled. "Once, years ago, in an Arabic medical text my husband brought back from his travels. It was a treatise on surgical techniques from Baghdad. This pattern, it's meant to relieve pressure on the brain after head trauma. But that technique isn't known in the colonies. I've never seen it practiced here." "Where did Captain Vale say he found her?" Elias asked. "At a burned farmstead in the Western Territories. At least, that's what his official report says." Sarah's expression was skeptical. "But I've seen burn victims, Elias. This child has no burns. No smoke damage to her lungs. If she was at a farmstead fire, she escaped untouched." Martha had climbed into the bed and was curling up like a cat, her eyes already drooping with exhaustion. But as sleep took her, she began to sing again, that same haunting lullaby from the asylum, words flowing over each other like water, ancient and strange and beautiful. Elias listened, translating what he could. It was a prayer song, he realized. A blessing for the dead. The kind a mother might sing over a grave. "She's singing for her people," he whispered. "The ones who burned." Sarah touched his arm gently. "Come downstairs. Let her rest. You and I need to talk." In Sarah's small office, surrounded by ledgers and bills and letters requesting aid, they sat across from each other with cups of weak tea. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the window panes and making the building creak. "Tell me what you really think is happening here," Sarah said. "And don't give me academic hedging. You're frightened. I can see it." Elias wrapped his hands around the warm cup and considered his words carefully. "When I was young, before I came to Harvard, I spent 3 years in Rome. I'd been given special permission to access the Vatican archives, a rare privilege for a Protestant scholar. I was there to study ancient languages, to translate texts that hadn't been read in centuries." "I remember," Sarah said. "Your wife used to tell stories about those years. She said you came back changed." "I came back knowing things the church preferred stayed buried," Elias said quietly. "History isn't neat and simple, Sarah. It's not the orderly progression from primitive to civilized that we teach our students. There are gaps. Lost civilizations. Knowledge that disappeared. The Vatican has records of things that would shake the very foundations of our understanding. And you think Martha is connected to these gaps? I think Martha is speaking a language that's been dead for 2,000 years as fluently as you and I speak English. I think that's impossible by every rational explanation. Which means either I'm losing my mind, a possibility I've considered, or there's an explanation that would be considered impossible by every rational standard we have." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her sharp eyes studying his face. "What did Reverend Blackwood mean about your library?" "I don't know. But I intend to find out." Elias stood, suddenly urgent. "I need to go back to my house. Check on my collection. Will Martha be safe here tonight?" "As safe as I can make her," Sarah promised. "I'll sleep in the room with her." "And Elias?" She caught his arm as he turned to leave. "Whatever this is, be careful. Josiah Blackwood is a dangerous man to cross. He has the ear of half the colonial government and all of Boston's religious establishment." "I know," Elias said. "But some things are worth the risk." Elias's house stood near Harvard Yard, a modest 2-story affair that had been much grander when his wife was alive. Now it was more library than home, every room crammed with books and papers and artifacts collected over 40 years of scholarship. He'd inherited a comfortable fortune from his father's shipping business, but he'd spent most of it on his collection, first editions, rare manuscripts, objects that other scholars dismissed as worthless but that he'd known held secrets. He pushed open the front door and immediately knew something was wrong. The smell hit him first, smoke, acrid and recent. Then he saw the chaos. His library, his beautiful library that had taken a lifetime to build, had been ransacked. Books lay scattered across the floor, their spines broken, pages torn. His filing cabinets had been forced open, their contents dumped and scattered. But this wasn't random destruction. This was systematic searching. Someone had been looking for something specific. Elias moved through the wreckage with a growing sense of horror and dread. Certain books were missing, very specific books. The ones dealing with pre-Columbian civilizations. The ones suggesting contact between the Old World and the New long before Columbus. The ones that the academic establishment had dismissed as fraudulent or irrelevant. Someone had taken them. Someone had deliberately targeted the volumes that might help him understand Martha's impossible language. A noise from upstairs made him freeze. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Someone was still in his house. Elias grabbed the iron poker from beside his cold fireplace and moved toward the stairs, his heart hammering. He was 67 years old, his fighting days long behind him, but anger gave him a kind of reckless courage. "Who's there?" he called. "I'm armed, and I've sent for the constable." A figure appeared at the top of the stairs, silhouetted against the light from the upper floor. For a moment Elias thought it might be a common burglar, but then the person spoke, and he recognized the voice. "No, you haven't, Professor. I watched you walk the girl to the orphanage. You came straight here." Thomas Winthorpe descended the stairs slowly, his young face troubled in the candlelight. "I'm sorry you had to see this." Thomas. His former student. His brightest pupil. The one who'd mastered Greek and Latin and Hebrew by age 20, who'd been teaching at Harvard for 3 years now, who'd been positioned to take over Elias's position once the old man finally retired or died. "Thomas?" Elias lowered the poker slightly. "What are you doing here? Did you see who did this?" Thomas reached the bottom of the stairs and looked around at the destruction with something like regret. "I did this, Professor. On Reverend Blackwood's orders." The words took a moment to register. When they did, Elias felt his knees go weak. "You what?" "I'm sorry," Thomas said, and he sounded like he meant it. "The Reverend came to me this afternoon. Told me you were losing your faculties, that you'd become obsessed with a delusional orphan girl. He said you had books that were dangerous, that spread heretical ideas. He asked me to retrieve them before you hurt yourself or your reputation further. And you just agreed." Elias's voice came out strangled. "Thomas, I taught you for 10 years. I trusted you." "I know." Thomas looked down at his hands. "And I'm grateful for everything you taught me, truly. But Professor, you have to understand. The Reverend has influence. Real influence. And he's offering me your position. Not in 10 years when you finally retire, but now. If I help him with this matter." "What matter?" Elias demanded. What possible threat could an orphan girl pose to Josiah Blackwood? "I don't know," Thomas admitted. "He didn't tell me. Just said the books needed to disappear and that I needed to search your papers for any notes about pre-Columbian civilizations, particularly anything related to." He paused, frowning. It was a strange word. Carthage? He seemed very concerned about Carthage. Elias felt cold understanding wash over him. He knows. Somehow, he already knows what Martha represents. What does she represent? I'm not sure yet, Elias lied, because he wasn't ready to trust Thomas with this knowledge. Not now. But I intend to find out. Thomas, please. Whatever Blackwood has promised you, it's not worth becoming his tool. He's using you. Thomas laughed bitterly. We're all someone's tools, Professor. At least Blackwood's using me to advance my career rather than keeping me as a permanent assistant to a dying scholar. Do you have any idea how the other professors talk about you? How they pity me for being stuck in your shadow? I gave you opportunities. You gave me scraps. Thomas's voice rose. You let me teach freshmen Latin while you hoarded all the interesting research, all the important projects. I'm 28 years old, Professor. I should be making my name, not waiting for you to finally admit you're past your prime. The word stung worse than any physical blow could have. Elias looked at this young man he'd mentored, had trusted, had thought of almost as a son, and saw a stranger. Ambition had eaten away whatever loyalty or affection had been there. The books, Elias said quietly. Where are they? I delivered them to the Reverend an hour ago. Along with your notes on Phoenician languages, your theories about Mediterranean contact with the Americas, and your translation of that Venetian manuscript about pre-Columbian civilizations. Thomas moved toward the door. I'm sorry it came to this. I really am. But you should take the Reverend's advice, Professor. Retire gracefully. Enjoy your remaining years. Stop chasing phantoms that will only destroy what little legacy you have left. Then he was gone, leaving Elias alone in the ruins of his life's work. Elias spent the night trying to salvage what he could, his hands shaking as he picked up torn pages and tried to sort through the chaos. Some books could be repaired. Some notes could be reconstructed from memory. But the specialized volumes Blackwood had taken, those were irreplaceable. As dawn broke through his windows, painting the wreckage in cold gray light, Elias found himself thinking about his late wife, Eleanor. She died 5 years ago, cancer eating through her with methodical cruelty, and in those final days she'd made him promise something. Don't let them silence you, she'd whispered, her voice barely audible. You've always been afraid to publish your real theories, afraid the academic establishment would destroy you. But Elias, some truths are worth dying for. Find one. Tell it. Even if they laugh at you. Even if they call you mad. Promise me you'll find one truth worth everything and tell it to the world. He'd made that promise. And then he'd broken it, day after day, year after year, playing it safe, teaching sanitized versions of history, keeping his dangerous theories locked away in his private library where they couldn't threaten his position or his reputation. But now Blackwood had taken even that. Had stolen the work of a lifetime because a 12-year-old girl spoke an impossible language. Elias stood, his joints protesting, and walked to the one cabinet the intruders hadn't found, the false panel in the back of his bedroom closet where he kept his most sensitive materials. His hands trembled as he worked the hidden latch and pulled out a single leather-bound journal. Eleanor had given it to him on their 20th anniversary, hand-tooled leather with his initials embossed in gold. For your magnum opus, she'd said, smiling. The book that tells the world what you really believe about history. The journal was filled with 40 years of accumulated heresy. Theories about pre-Columbian contact between the Old World and the Americas. Evidence of civilizations that had flourished and died before recorded history. Artifacts that didn't fit the accepted narrative. translations of texts the Vatican had tried to destroy. And scattered throughout, like scattered puzzle pieces, were references to Carthage, the greatest naval power of the ancient Mediterranean world, destroyed by Rome in 146 BC in an orgy of violence so complete that the Romans supposedly sowed the city's ruins with salt so nothing would ever grow there again. But what if some had escaped? What if Carthaginian ships, sailing west to flee Rome's legions, had found land across the Atlantic? What if they'd established colonies, and those colonies had survived, hidden from European eyes, maintaining their culture and language for generation after generation? It would explain Martha. It would explain everything. Elias tucked the journal inside his coat and headed for the orphanage. He had to warn Sarah. Had to see Martha. Had to understand what Blackwood was really afraid of. The streets were just beginning to wake as he walked, shopkeepers opening their shutters, maids carrying water, early morning workers heading to the docks. British soldiers stood at corners, watching everything with suspicious eyes. The occupation had made Boston feel like a city at war with itself, loyalist against patriot, old order against new. He was nearly to the orphanage when he noticed the man following him. The figure stayed about 50 yards back, trying to look casual, but Elias had spent enough time in Rome's dangerous neighborhoods to recognize a tail when he saw one. He turned down a side street, then another, taking a circuitous route. The man followed, more obviously now. Elias ducked into an alley and waited, pressing himself against the wall. When the man passed the alley's mouth, Elias grabbed his arm and yanked him into the shadows, pressing him against the bricks with more strength than he thought he had. The man was younger than Elias had expected, perhaps 40, with a weather-beaten face and the rolling gait of someone who'd spent most of his life at sea. His clothes were merchant sailor attire, practical and worn. "Who sent you?" Elias demanded. "Blackwood." "I'm not with Blackwood," the man gasped, not fighting back. "I'm Captain Marcus Vale. I'm the one who brought the girl to Boston." Elias released him slightly but didn't step back. "The official report said you found her at a burned farmstead." "The official report is a lie," Vale said, rubbing his arm where Elias had grabbed him. "I've been trying to get to you since yesterday, but Blackwood's people have been watching. I saw what happened at your house last night. Watched that young fool carry out boxes of books. I figured you'd come to the orphanage this morning, so I waited." "Why did you lie in your report?" Vale looked around nervously, then lowered his voice. "Because I found the girl somewhere I wasn't supposed to be. Somewhere that officially doesn't exist. And when I brought her to Boston and certain people found out where she really came from." He shook his head. "I've got a wife and children, Dr. Thornbury. I said what they told me to say. But I can't sleep. That little girl, she looks at you with eyes that have seen things, know things. And I keep thinking about my own daughter, about what if she was the one lost and scared and nobody told the truth about where she came from." "Where did you find her?" Vale looked around again, then pulled Elias deeper into the alley, behind a stack of barrels where they couldn't be seen from the street. 3 weeks ago, I was running a cargo shipment down the coast. We got caught in a storm, blown off course. When it cleared, we were near these cliffs I'd never seen before, even though I've sailed these waters for 20 years. There was a cove, hidden, and ruins. Not English ruins, not native ruins. Stone buildings with architecture I've never seen, columns and arches and strange symbols carved everywhere." Elias's heart raced. "And the girl?" "She was hiding in one of the buildings. Alone. Terrified. The place had been attacked recently, there were bodies, Professor. People dressed in strange clothes, all dead. And the way they died. Vale's face had gone pale. Someone had murdered them systematically. Executed them. Men, women, elderly. All except her. She'd hidden somehow. When we found her, she was half-starved, covered in blood that wasn't hers. Where exactly? That's the thing, Vale interrupted. I tried to sail back there 2 days after bringing her to Boston. Soon as I'd filed my false report and delivered her to the asylum. I took the same route, marked my charts careful as could be. But I couldn't find it. The cove, the ruins, all of it, just gone. Or maybe I'm remembering wrong. But I know what I saw, Dr. Thornbury. That place was real. Did you take anything from the ruins? Any objects, artifacts? Vale hesitated, then reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather pouch. The girl had this clutched in her hand when we found her. The asylum keeper would have taken it, sold it probably. So I kept it safe. Figured I'd give it to someone who'd know what to do with it. Seems like maybe you're that someone. He poured the contents of the pouch into Elias's outstretched hand, and the world tilted. Coins. Ancient coins, worn with age but still clearly identifiable. Carthaginian coins, the kind Elias had only seen in Vatican vaults and private collections. Silver and bronze, stamped with the profile of a woman's face and strange symbols that he could read as easily as his own name. But these coins were different from any museum pieces he'd studied. The symbols were subtly changed. Evolved. The metallurgy was more sophisticated. And one coin, larger than the others, showed something that made his breath catch in his throat. It depicted Carthaginian ships, the distinctive war galleys with their triple rows of oars, but they were shown sailing away from a burning city. And on the reverse side, the ships approached a coastline that could only be the Americas, with symbols indicating West, new land, refuge. The date on the coin corresponded to 146 BC, the year Rome destroyed Carthage. Mother of God, Elias whispered. These coins are from 146 BC. They show the fall of Carthage. But this one shows Carthaginian ships sailing west to a new land. It's a commemorative coin. A record of their escape and arrival. Vale stared at the coins. They're valuable then. Valuable. Elias laughed, a slightly hysterical sound. Captain, these are impossible. They shouldn't exist. They prove that Carthaginian refugees reached America 1600 years before Columbus. They prove everything the academic establishment has dismissed as fantasy. They prove, he stopped, realization dawning. They prove why Blackwood is so desperate to silence Martha. Because she's not just speaking an ancient language. She's proof that European claims of discovering a pristine new world are built on lies. I don't understand politics and history, Professor, Vale said. I just know that little girl has suffered, and powerful men want to make sure nobody knows the truth about where she came from. That sits poorly with me. You said you have a daughter. Vale's expression softened. Annie. She's 9. Smartest child you ever met, always asking questions, always wanting to know how things work. His face darkened. She went missing 6 months ago. Taken from our home in the night. No ransom demands, no trace. My wife's near mad with grief. That's part of why I can't ignore what's happening to this Martha girl. Every child who suffers, I think of my Annie, wonder if someone's helping her wherever she is. Elias gripped Vale's shoulder. Come with me to the orphanage. I want you to see Martha, speak with Mrs. Hartley. Between the three of us, perhaps we can keep this child safe long enough to understand what's really happening." They emerged from the alley to find the morning had grown fully bright, Boston streets now crowded with people going about their business. Nobody gave them a second glance, just an old professor and a sea captain, probably discussing some boring academic matter. The orphanage was quiet when they arrived. Too quiet. Elias felt dread coiling in his stomach as he pushed open the door and found the main room empty, chairs overturned, breakfast left half-eaten on the table. "Sarah," he called. "Mrs. Hartley." Footsteps thundered down the stairs, and Sarah appeared, her face flushed, her hair escaping its pins. "Thank God you're here." "It's Martha, she won't stop screaming. Won't let any of us near her. It's like she's seeing things that aren't there, thrashing and fighting invisible attackers." They raced upstairs to find the small bedroom in chaos. Martha was backed into the corner, her eyes wild and unfocused, making sounds that weren't words but pure animal terror. The other children huddled in the doorway, frightened. "How long has she been like this?" Elias asked. "Started about an hour after dawn. She woke up screaming, and she hasn't stopped." Sarah approached Martha slowly, hands outstretched. "Sweetheart, please. You're safe. Nobody's going to hurt you." But Martha didn't seem to hear. She was somewhere else, reliving whatever horror she'd witnessed. Her hands clawed at the air, fighting off attackers that only she could see. Vale pushed past them into the room. "Let me try something." He knelt in front of Martha, not touching her but close enough that she'd have to see him. Then he did something unexpected, he began to sing. Not in English, but in something else, a language with similar cadences to Martha's Punic but different. Native words, Elias realized. Words from one of the coastal tribes. The effect was instantaneous. Martha's screaming stopped. Her wild eyes focused on Vale, and she whispered something in Punic that Elias barely caught. A question. A desperate hope. "I don't understand her words," Vale said quietly, still singing between phrases. "But I've traded with the tribes for 20 years. Learned some of their ways. There's a calming song they use for traumatized children. Figured it might help." Martha was trembling now, tears streaming down her face, but the manic terror had passed. She spoke again in Punic, longer this time, and Elias translated as best he could. "She's asking if you're a friend to the hidden people. If you know where the others are." "She says?" He paused, struggling with the archaic grammar. "She says she was sent to find help. That the dark robes came to her settlement and killed everyone. That there are other settlements, other hidden villages of her people, and they're all in danger. She says she's not the last, but she might be soon." Sarah made a small sound of horror. "Other children? Other settlements like hers?" "Not settlements," Elias corrected, understanding flooding through him. "Colonies. Carthaginian colonies that have existed in secret for nearly 2,000 years. Descendants of refugees who fled Rome's destruction and built new lives here. They've stayed hidden all this time, maintaining their language, their culture, their knowledge. And someone has decided to erase them from history." "Blackwood," Vale said. It wasn't a question. Not just Blackwood. Something larger. Elias moved to the window and looked out at Boston streets, suddenly seeing the city differently. Think about it. The colonies are built on the idea that Europeans discovered a new world, that they brought civilization to a savage land. That God ordained their manifest destiny. But what if there were already civilizations here? Advanced ones, with technologies and knowledge the colonists lack. What would that do to the entire justification for European conquest? It would make them conquerors, not discoverers, Sarah said slowly. It would make them the destroyers of existing civilizations rather than the builders of new ones. Exactly. And for men like Blackwood, who've built their power and authority on divine providence and manifest destiny, that truth is more dangerous than any military threat. Elias turned back to Martha, who was watching him with those ancient eyes. She's not just an orphan. She's a witness. Living proof that the founding myths of the colonies are lies. Martha spoke again, and this time her words were clearer, more deliberate. She pointed at Elias, then at her own chest, then made a gesture that encompassed the city beyond the window. She's saying you're the one who can tell, Elias translated. The one who can make the others understand. She calls me. I think it's keeper of old words. Can you? Vale asked. Tell others? Make them understand. Elias thought of his ransacked library, his stolen books, his betrayal by Thomas. He thought of his precarious position at Harvard, of Blackwood's influence, of how easy it would be to dismiss an old professor's theories as senile delusions. I can try, he said. But I'll need evidence. Real, undeniable evidence. The coins are a start, but we need more. We need, he stopped as an idea struck him. Captain Vale, you said Martha had medical scars. Techniques from banned texts. Mrs. Hartley, you recognized them. Yes, from Arabic medical treatises. Surgical procedures that wouldn't be known here. But they would be known to a culture that had maintained contact with the old world's medical knowledge. A culture that preserved ancient learning while Europe lost it in the Dark Ages. Elias began pacing, his mind racing. What if the Carthaginian colonies maintained their scientific and medical knowledge? What if they continued advancing while European civilization collapsed and had to rebuild? The scars on Martha's back might be evidence of medical practices more advanced than anything in colonial America. Sarah's eyes widened. You want me to document her scars? Create medical drawings and notes? Yes. And anything else unusual about her physiology or health? If she's been raised with better medicine than we have, it will show. Elias turned to Vale. And you need to try to find those ruins again. Take me with you this time. If we can locate the settlement, if we can document what was done there. That's madness, Vale interrupted. Whoever destroyed that place will be watching for anyone who tries to return. We'd be sailing straight into a massacre. Perhaps. But it might be our only chance to prove Martha's story before Blackwood finds a way to silence all of us permanently. A knock at the front door downstairs made them all freeze. Sarah held up a hand, then moved quietly to the stairs. Through the window, Elias could see two men in dark coats standing on the stoop. Not soldiers. Not constables. Private individuals with the bearing of hired enforcers. The Reverend's men, Sarah whispered, returning quickly. They're asking about Martha. Saying they've come to collect her by order of the asylum masters. They have no authority here, Elias said, but even as he spoke he knew it didn't matter. Blackwood could manufacture authority. Could produce documents. Could claim legal jurisdiction over an orphaned, possibly insane child. Martha had gone completely still, her eyes fixed on the door as if she could see through the walls to the men below. She spoke one word, barely audible. Tarnit. Not the goddess's name this time, Elias realized. A prayer. A plea for protection. There's a back way out, Sarah said quickly. through the kitchen to the alley. But they'll see you if you try to leave with her. Then I'll go face them, Elias said. Buy you time to hide her. Captain Vale, can you get Martha to your ship? Keep her safe there until we figure out our next move. Vale nodded grimly. Aye. My crew's loyal, and they owe me. Nobody comes aboard the Esperanza without my say-so. Another knock, harder this time. A voice called through the door. Mrs. Hartley. We know you're home. Open up by order of Reverend Blackwood. Go, Elias said. Now. I'll handle this. Sarah grabbed Martha's hand, and Vale scooped up a cloak to cover the girl's distinctive appearance. They moved quickly toward the back stairs while Elias descended the front, trying to school his features into an expression of confused innocence. He opened the door to find two large men with hard faces and harder eyes. Behind them, sitting in an expensive carriage, was Reverend Josiah Blackwood himself, watching with an expression of barely concealed anticipation. Dr. Thornbury, one of the men said. We're here for the girl. The asylum has determined she needs to be in permanent care. We have the paperwork. I'm afraid you're mistaken, Elias said calmly. The girl is under Mrs. Hartley's protection as an orphan. The asylum has no jurisdiction once a child has been released to proper care. The Reverend says otherwise. Now step aside, old man, or we'll move you aside. Elias didn't move. Behind him, he could hear the faint sounds of Sarah and Vale moving through the house. He needed to give them more time. You know, Elias said conversationally, I've been thinking about the law. Specifically, the law regarding the seizure of children. Under colonial statute, you need either a magistrate's order or evidence of immediate danger to remove a child from a licensed orphanage. Do you have either? The men exchanged glances. The Reverend's word isn't a magistrate's order. And unless you can prove the child is in immediate danger under Mrs. Hartley's care, which you can't, since she's one of the most respected caretakers in Boston, then you're attempting unlawful kidnapping. Which, I believe, carries rather severe penalties, including possible hanging. One man's hand went to the cudgel at his belt, but the other grabbed his arm. They'd expected an easy intimidation, not legal complications. They turned to look at Blackwood's carriage, seeking guidance. The Reverend stepped out, his black robe swirling dramatically. He approached Elias with measured steps, his face a mask of reasonable concern. Elias, please. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. The girl is disturbed. She needs proper medical care, not the chaos of an orphanage. I'm only thinking of her welfare. Are you? Elias asked softly. Or are you thinking of what she represents? What she knows? Something flickered in Blackwood's eyes. I have no idea what you mean. Don't you? Strange how interested you are in one disturbed child, Josiah. Strange how you sent my former student to ransack my library for books about ancient civilizations. Strange how determined you are to prevent anyone from learning where Martha really came from. You're overwrought, old friend. Your recent obsessions have obviously. I'm not your friend, Elias interrupted. And I'm not senile or delusional. I know exactly what you're doing, and I know why. The question is, why are you so desperate to hide the truth? What does it threaten? Blackwood's mask slipped for just a moment, and Elias saw naked fury beneath. You have no idea what forces you're meddling with, Elias. This isn't about one girl or one scholar's pet theories. There are powers in the colonies, organizations that have worked for decades to maintain order and proper understanding. If certain truths were to become widely known, it could undermine everything we've built. Everything we are. Everything built on lies should be undermined. History is written by victors, not by old fools too stubborn to accept their irrelevance. Blackwood gestured to his men. Search the house. Find the girl. You have no authority, Elias began, but Blackwood pulled a document from his coat. I have this. Signed by 3 magistrates and the colonial governor himself. Authorization to collect 1 Martha Whitmore, orphan minor of unknown origin, and convey her to permanent institutional care for the protection of public welfare. His smile was triumphant. Your legal objections are noted and dismissed, Professor. Now, step aside or be removed. The men pushed past Elias, their boots heavy on the orphanage wooden floors. Elias heard them shouting, heard doors slamming open. Heard Sarah's voice raised in protest. But he heard no child's cry, no capture. After 10 minutes of increasingly frustrated searching, the men returned. She's not here, Reverend. Must have slipped out the back. Blackwood's jaw clenched. He turned to Elias with cold fury. Where is she? I have no idea what you're talking about. The girl was here earlier, but Mrs. Hartley often takes the children on morning walks. They could be anywhere in Boston by now. You're lying. Prove it. They stared at each other, and Elias saw in Blackwood's eyes something he hadn't fully appreciated before. Not just ambition or religious zealotry, but genuine fear. The Reverend was terrified of what Martha represented, of what truth she might tell. This isn't over, Elias, Blackwood said quietly. You've made yourself an enemy of forces far greater than one old professor can stand against. You'll lose your position at Harvard. Your reputation will be destroyed. And when you die alone and forgotten, your precious theories will die with you, and no one will care. Perhaps, Elias said. But some truths are worth dying for. My late wife taught me that. Blackwood turned on his heel and strode back to his carriage. His men followed, though one of them looked back at Elias with something that might have been grudging respect. When they were gone, Sarah emerged from the kitchen, her face pale. They're safe. Vale got Martha to the docks through the back alleys. He said he'll keep her on his ship until we have a plan. Elias sagged against the doorframe, suddenly feeling every one of his 67 years. We need more than a plan, Sarah. We need proof that will stand up to scrutiny. Evidence so clear that even Blackwood can't suppress it. The coins can be dismissed as fraudulent. We need more. We need to find those ruins Vale described. We need to document what was done there. He stopped as realization hit him. We need to find the other children Martha mentioned. The other survivors of hidden settlements. Sarah's expression was grim. If they even exist. And if Blackwood hasn't already found them. They exist, Elias said with certainty. Martha wouldn't lie about that. Somewhere in the colonies, there are other children like her. Other witnesses to a history that powerful men want erased. We have to find them before Blackwood does. The next 3 days passed in a blur of fevered research and growing paranoia. Elias barricaded himself in what remained of his library, cross-referencing every scrap of information he could find about mysterious orphans, children speaking unknown languages, unexplained disappearances. He worked by candlelight, jumping at every sound, aware that Blackwood's men might return at any moment. Thomas appeared once, standing in the doorway with a box of books. The Reverend said I should return these. He's extracted what he needed. Needed for what? Elias asked without looking up. "I don't ask questions I don't want answered, Professor. You should try it sometime." Thomas set down the box and hesitated. "For what it's worth. I am sorry. About your library. About all of this. But not sorry enough to stop working for him. No. Not that sorry." When Thomas left, Elias examined the returned books. They'd been carefully searched, certain pages marked or torn out, specific passages highlighted. Blackwood had been looking for something particular, references to pre-Columbian settlements, mentions of Mediterranean contact with the Americas, anything that might lead to the hidden colonies. On the fourth day, Sarah sent word via a street urchin, "Come to the docks." Vale found something. Elias made his way through Boston's crowded waterfront, the air thick with salt and fish and tar. The Esperanza was a three-masted merchant vessel, showing her age but still seaworthy. Vale met him at the gangplank, his expression troubled. "She drew something," Vale said without preamble. "I gave her paper and charcoal, thinking maybe she could draw where she came from, help us find the settlement again. But what she drew instead..." He shook his head. "You need to see for yourself." Martha was in Vale's cabin, the small space lit by a porthole and a whale oil lamp. She looked healthier than when Elias had first seen her in the asylum. Sarah had made sure she was fed and clothed properly. But her eyes still held that ancient, haunted quality. She held up her drawing without being asked. It was a map. Not a crude child's sketch, but a detailed, accurate map of the Boston harbor and surrounding coastline. Every inlet, every island, every landmark was precisely rendered. But that wasn't what made Elias's hand shake as he took the paper. Martha had drawn structures that didn't exist on any official colonial map. Hidden buildings marked with Carthaginian symbols. Underground chambers beneath known landmarks. A whole shadow city beneath the one the colonists had built. And in the harbor itself, marked with careful precision, were ruins underwater. Stone structures that shouldn't be there, that no one had ever documented. "She says these are old places," Vale translated, pointing to the submerged structures. "Places her people built when they first came. Before the water rose and covered them. She says they're still there, under the waves. And they prove her people were here first." Elias studied the map with mounting excitement. "If we could reach these ruins, document them, bring up artifacts, it would be undeniable proof. Even Blackwood couldn't suppress physical evidence pulled from the harbor floor." "There's more," Vale said. "She drew other maps too. Locations up and down the coast. Places where her people have settlements." He pulled out several more drawings. Each one shows a hidden village or colony. And next to each one, she's drawn this symbol. He pointed to a mark that looked like a stylized flame. "I think it means they've been destroyed. Burned. Like what happened to her settlement." Elias counted the marked locations. 7. 7 settlements destroyed along the colonial coastline. "She's also marked 3 without the fire symbol," Vale continued, pointing to maps of more northern territories. "I think those are the ones still surviving. The other children she mentioned. We need to warn them," Elias said immediately. "If Blackwood knows about these settlements." "He does," said a new voice. They spun to find a figure standing in the cabin doorway. A man in his mid-40s with the weather-beaten look of someone who'd spent years at sea, his clothes merchant sailor practical, his eyes sharp and calculating. Vale's hand went to the knife at his belt. "Who the hell?" "My name is Samuel Graves," the man said calmly. "I'm a member of the Order of New Canaan." Or rather, I was until 2 months ago, when I realized what we were really doing. Martha made a sound low in her throat and pressed herself against the far wall. The man raised his hands. I'm not here to hurt anyone. I'm here because Reverend Blackwood's next target is Martha herself. He's planning to raid this ship tonight with militia support, claiming you're harboring a fugitive from lawful custody. How do we know you're telling the truth? Elias demanded. You don't. But I can tell you things that might convince you I'm genuine. Graves stepped fully into the cabin. The Order of New Canaan isn't just a religious society. It's a secret organization that's existed since the early days of colonization. Its purpose is to eliminate evidence of pre-Columbian civilizations in the Americas, specifically, evidence that challenges European claims of discovery and manifest destiny. How many of you are there? Hundreds across the colonies. Ministers, magistrates, merchants, military officers. Men of influence in every position of power. We've been systematically destroying archaeological sites, eliminating artifacts, burning records. And for the past 50 years, we've been hunting the hidden settlements. The Carthaginian colonies, Elias said. Graves nodded. We call them the hidden people. They've lived in secret for nearly 2,000 years, maintaining their language and culture, preserving knowledge from the ancient world. At first, the Order simply avoided them, let them live in peace as long as they stayed hidden. But about 50 years ago, leadership changed. The new masters decided the hidden people were too dangerous to tolerate. That if their existence became known, it would undermine the entire justification for colonial expansion. So you've been murdering them, Vale said flatly. Yes. Graves met his eyes without flinching. We destroyed 7 settlements in the past 5 years. Systematic eradication. Men, women, elderly. We leave no survivors who might tell their story. But you left Martha, Elias said. She wasn't supposed to survive. The raiders thought they'd killed everyone. But she was small enough to hide in a space they didn't search. By the time they realized their mistake, Captain Vale had already found her and brought her to Boston. Graves looked at Martha with something like regret. The Order has been hunting her ever since. Blackwood wanted to keep it quiet, handle it through official channels. But his patience is running out. Why are you telling us this? Sarah asked. Why betray your own organization? Graves was quiet for a moment. I have a daughter. Had a daughter. She asked questions. Smart girl, always wanting to know about history, about the past. One day she came to me with something she'd found, an artifact from one of the hidden settlements. She wanted to know what it was, where it came from. And I realized. His voice broke slightly. I realized I'd been so busy protecting lies that I'd lost sight of truth. She died 2 years ago, fever. And I kept thinking about what kind of world I was building for her generation. One based on convenient myths rather than honest history. That's a touching story, Vale said skeptically. But it doesn't prove you're not leading us into a trap. The hidden people have a refuge, Graves said, ignoring Vale's suspicion. A central colony further north, in territories not yet claimed by Europeans. Larger than the others, better defended. Martha's people sent her south as a messenger, trying to reach Boston scholars who might help them. The colony elders knew Blackwood was systematically destroying their settlements. They were desperate. Martha spoke suddenly in Punic, rapid and urgent. Elias translated as best he could. She says he's telling the truth. She recognizes him. He was at one of the destroyed settlements, but he argued against the killing. She says the other men called him weak. Graves looked at Martha with haunted eyes. I watched them burn your village. Watched them kill your people. And I did nothing. I'm sorry. God help me, I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't bring them back, Vale said harshly. No. But maybe I can prevent more deaths. The central refuge is called New Carthaginian, New Carthage. It's hidden in the mountains north of here, a week's journey by ship and another week overland. The hidden people have lived there for 1800 years, maintaining the knowledge and culture of the ancient world. Their library alone, Graves shook his head. You can't imagine what they preserved. Scientific texts, philosophical works, medical knowledge that Europe lost in the Dark Ages. It's all there. And Blackwood knows about this place. Elias asked. He does now. I told him, 2 weeks ago, before I understood what the order really was. He's assembling a force. 200 men, including colonial militia. They plan to march on New Carthaginian within the month and destroy it completely. This time, they'll make sure there are no survivors. The cabin fell silent except for the gentle creaking of the ship and the lapping of water against the hull. We have to warn them, Sarah said finally. Get word to this New Carthage place before Blackwood's forces arrive. How? Vale asked practically. We're being watched. If we try to leave Boston, Blackwood's men will follow. We'd lead them straight to the refuge. Not if we split up, Graves said. I can create a diversion. Make Blackwood think Martha's being taken south by ship. While his forces chase that false trail, a smaller group could head north overland. Why should we trust you? Elias demanded. You shouldn't. But what choice do you have? Blackwood will raid this ship tonight. If you're still here with the girl, you'll all be arrested or killed. Your only chance is to move now, and I'm offering you a way out. Elias looked at Martha, who was watching the adults with ancient eyes. Everything depended on what they decided in the next few minutes. Stay and face Blackwood's forces. Run south and lead enemies to innocent people. Or trust a traitor's information and head north into unknown territory. Eleanor, he whispered to his long-dead wife, I hope you're watching. Because I'm about to risk everything on one truth, just like you asked. He turned to Vale. Can you get us north? Along the coast. Aye, if the weather holds. But it's a dangerous coast this time of year. Storms, rocks, British patrols. More dangerous than staying here. Vale smiled grimly. Fair point. All right. We sail at dusk. I'll tell the crew we're making a regular cargo run. Anyone watching will think it's business as usual. I'll spread word that Martha's being taken south, Graves said. Feed information to known order members that she's bound for Philadelphia. Blackwood will divert his forces to intercept. And what's to stop you from telling him the truth? Sarah asked. Nothing, except my word. And the fact that my daughter's grave is in Boston. I'd like to visit it someday without the weight of genocide on my conscience. They sailed at dusk, the Esperanza slipping out of Boston Harbor with the evening tide. Vale had been right about the coast. Within hours, they encountered choppy seas and gusting winds that had Martha clinging white-knuckled to anything stable while the adults tried to hide their own discomfort. Elias spent most of the voyage in Vale's cabin with Martha, trying to learn more of her language while teaching her English. She was a quick study, picking up words with the ease of youth, though she still struggled with certain sounds that didn't exist in Punic. On the third day at sea, As they rounded a rocky promontory into calmer waters, Martha suddenly stood and pointed at the coastline. She spoke rapidly in Punic, then struggled to find English words. "Home," she managed finally. "Near home." Vale adjusted their course, bringing them closer to shore. The coastline here was wild and untamed, thick forests running down to rocky beaches, no sign of colonial settlement. As they sailed north, Martha grew more animated, pointing out landmarks that meant something to her: a distinctively shaped mountain, a river mouth, an island with twisted pines. "There," she said finally, pointing to what looked like an unremarkable stretch of coast. "Hidden door." Vale squinted at the shore. "I don't see anything but rocks and trees." "That's rather the point of a hidden, I suspect," Elias said. He turned to Martha. "How do we reach your people?" Martha thought for a moment, then drew in the air with her finger, a specific pattern, like a signal. "Show this," she said in halting English. "They see. They come." Vale ordered his crew to drop anchor in a protected cove. They waited as the sun climbed higher, the ship rocking gently on the swells. Elias was beginning to think Martha had been mistaken when Sarah, who'd been watching the shore through Vale's telescope, suddenly gasped. "There's someone there. On the rocks. Watching us." Elias took the telescope and scanned the shoreline. At first he saw nothing, then movement caught his eye, a figure standing on a rocky outcrop, perfectly still, nearly invisible against the grey stone. The person wore clothing that blended with the environment, and held what might have been a weapon, though at this distance Elias couldn't be sure. Martha moved to the rail and made the hand signal she'd shown them, repeating it 3 times. The figure on shore remained motionless for a long moment, then returned the signal. More figures emerged from the forest, 10 or 12 of them, appearing as if from nowhere. "They have boats," Sarah said, still watching through the telescope. "They're launching boats." 3 small craft put out from shore, sleek vessels that moved with surprising speed. As they drew closer, Elias could see they were unlike any colonial boats he'd encountered. The design was ancient, efficient, clearly refined over many generations. The boats pulled alongside the Esperanza, and their occupants looked up at the ship's deck with expressions of cautious hope. They were dressed in practical clothing that mixed ancient styles with more modern adaptations, and they were armed with bows and spears alongside more contemporary weapons. One man, perhaps 50 years old with grey threading through his dark hair, called up in Punic. Martha responded, her voice breaking with emotion, and suddenly she was crying and laughing at the same time, a flood of words pouring out of her. The man's expression transformed from caution to joy to horror as Martha spoke. He called to his companions in rapid Punic, and Elias caught enough words to understand the essence. The child had returned, but she bore terrible news. "Dr. Thornbury," the man called in accented but clear English. "Martha says you are friend. You help her. We thank you. Please, come to shore. Our elders must hear what you know." The journey from ship to shore was tense, Elias and his companions aware they were putting themselves entirely in the hands of people they didn't know. But Martha's obvious joy at being reunited with her people eased some of the fear. The hidden door Martha had mentioned became clear as they approached. What looked like a natural cave mouth was actually an entrance to something far more elaborate. As they passed through, Elias saw carved stone, ancient symbols, architecture that made his scholar's heart race with excitement and recognition. The passage opened into a valley hidden from the sea by the rocky cliffs and from inland by the thick forest. And in that valley lay New Carthaginian. It was like stepping into the ancient Mediterranean world transplanted to American soil. Stone buildings with columns and arches, streets laid out in orderly grids, aqueducts carrying water from mountain streams, gardens, and workshops and what could only be temples. But it wasn't frozen in time. Elias could see adaptations, innovations, the evolution of 18 centuries of continuous habitation. Hundreds of people moved through the settlement, going about daily tasks with the easy rhythm of an established community. Children played in the streets. Craftsmen worked at their trades. Farmers tended gardens. A living, thriving civilization that official history claimed didn't exist. Mother of God, Elias whispered. It's real. All of it. It's all real. Sarah gripped his arm, her eyes wide with wonder. Even Vale, who'd seen the ruins where Martha was found, looked stunned by the scale of what lay before them. The man who'd greeted them at the boats introduced himself as Hanno, a council member and scholar. You are first outsiders to see New Carthaginian in 200 years, he said as he led them through the streets. We hoped we would never need to reveal ourselves. But Martha tells us the Dark Ones come. That they destroy our sister settlements. That they plan to destroy us all. I'm afraid that's true, Elias said. A man named Josiah Blackwood leads an organization dedicated to erasing your people from history. He's assembling a force to attack within weeks. Hanno's expression was grim. Then we must prepare. But first, our elders wish to speak with you. They wish to know what kind of men would help a lost child, what kind of people might be trusted with our greatest secret. They were led to the largest building in the settlement, a structure that reminded Elias of Roman Senate houses he'd seen in engravings. Inside, in a chamber lit by windows and oil lamps, a council of elders waited, men and women ranging from middle-aged to ancient, their faces bearing the wisdom of lives well lived. The eldest, a woman who must have been 90, spoke in Punic. Hanno translated, Elder Sophonisba welcomes you to New Carthaginian. She says Martha has told us of your kindness, your learning, your willingness to believe what others call impossible. She asks why you help us, when revealing our existence could bring you fame and fortune among your people. Elias stepped forward, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes upon him. Because truth matters more than convenience, he said simply. Because history belongs to everyone, not just to those who write it. And because a 12-year-old girl sang a death prayer in a language that shouldn't exist, and I couldn't ignore what that meant. The elder smiled slightly and spoke again. Hanno translated, she says you sound like our historians. Always caring more for truth and comfort. She says you should see our library. So you understand what is at stake. The library of New Carthaginian was housed in a building carved partially into the mountainside, protected from weather and fire. As Elias stepped inside, he felt tears prick his eyes. Shelves stretched in every direction, filled with scrolls and codices and bound books. Not ancient crumbling artifacts, but living texts, copied and recopied over generations, preserved and maintained and added to. The accumulated knowledge of 2,000 years. We saved what we could when we fled Carthage, Hanno explained, his voice reverent. Texts from our libraries, from Greece, from Egypt, from Persia. Knowledge that Rome would burn. And we kept copying, kept learning, kept adding. While Europe lost its learning in the Dark Ages, we preserved it. Medical texts, mathematical treatises, astronomical observations, philosophical works, all here. Elias moved among the shelves in a daze, recognizing titles he'd only seen mentioned in fragments, works that scholars believed lost forever. Scientific knowledge that wouldn't be rediscovered in Europe for centuries. Mathematical concepts that Arabic scholars would develop independently. Medical techniques that colonial doctors couldn't imagine. This is... He couldn't find words. This is the greatest archaeological find in human history. This is knowledge that could advance human understanding by centuries. This is why they want to destroy us, Hanno said quietly. Because if the world knew we existed, knew what we preserved, it would prove that European claims of bringing civilization to a savage land are lies. It would prove that we were here first, that we had knowledge they lacked, that their conquest destroyed rather than created. Sarah had found the medical section and was paging through texts with mounting excitement. These surgical techniques, I've never seen anything like them. Procedures for setting bones, treating infections, even removing tumors. This is more advanced than anything we have in the colonies. It's more advanced than anything they'll have in Europe for another century, Elias said. Don't you see? The hidden people maintained the medical knowledge of the ancient world and built upon it. While European doctors were bleeding patients and attributing disease to bad humors, your people were performing actual surgery. And when Blackwood comes, Hanno said, he will burn it all. Every text, every scroll, every record of our existence. Just like he burned our sister settlements. Not if we can help it, Vale said firmly. The captain had been quiet, taking in the settlement with a sailor's practical eye. How many people live here? Nearly 3,000. But most are farmers, craftsmen, families. We have perhaps 200 who could fight, and they're trained with bows and spears, not muskets. 200 against Blackwood's force of militia. Vale shook his head. Those aren't good odds. Then we must convince others to help, Elias said. There are people in the colonies who value truth, who would be horrified by what Blackwood plans. Scholars, ministers who actually believe in justice, magistrates who aren't in the order's pocket. If we can document what's here, bring back proof. No one will believe you, Hanno interrupted. You think your people want to know the truth? That they'll give up their comfortable myths because an old professor shows them ancient coins and talks about hidden cities. They'll call you mad. They'll say we're frauds, that you're a senile old man chasing fantasies. He's right, Sarah said reluctantly. Even if we brought back artifacts, physical proof, Blackwood has too much influence. He'd suppress it, discredit us, make sure the truth never spread beyond Boston. Elias felt despair creeping in. They'd found proof of everything he'd theorized, discovered a living ancient civilization, and it would all be destroyed because no one would believe them in time to stop it. Martha, who'd been quiet since arriving at the settlement, suddenly spoke. In English this time, halting but clear. Show them other children. Like me. More proof. Hanno looked at her sharply, then at the council of elders. A rapid conversation in Punic followed, voices raised in what sounded like argument. Finally, Elder Sophonisba spoke, her tone decisive. She's right, Hanno translated. Martha says we must find the other lost children. The ones taken by the Dark Ones over the years. If they still live, if we can free them and bring them forward, multiple children speaking our language, each with their own story, that would be harder to dismiss. What other children? Elias asked. Over the past 10 years, the Order has taken children from our settlements. Not killed them, taken them. We don't know why. We assumed they were studying them, trying to understand our language and customs. But we've never found where they're kept. Vale had gone very still. Children taken at night? Without trace or ransom? Yes. Usually the youngest, those who might not remember their homes clearly. Why? My daughter, Vale whispered. My Annie. She was taken 6 months ago from our home in Boston. 9 years old, dark hair, always asking questions. His voice broke. I thought it was slavers or criminal gangs. But if Blackwood's people were taking children who might know about the hidden people, who might have heard stories. Your daughter knew about us? Hanno asked sharply. I traded with native tribes up and down this coast for years. They told stories of the ghost people, pale-skinned folk who lived hidden in the forests, who spoke an old language and kept ancient knowledge. I thought they were myths, legends. But I told the stories to Annie anyway, because she loved hearing about mysterious things. Vale's hands were shaking. If Blackwood heard about those stories somehow, if he thought she might know something, then she might be alive, Sarah said. Held somewhere with other children who spoke too much or knew too much. Or she might be dead, Vale said harshly. We can't know. We can find out, Hanno said. We have allies among some of the native tribes. They move freely through colonial territories, see things colonists miss. If there's a place where the order is holding children, the tribes might know of it. How long would it take to contact them? Elias asked. Days. Maybe a week. We don't have a week. Blackwood will be organizing his forces, and once he realizes Martha made it to the northern settlements, he'll accelerate his timeline. Elias thought rapidly, pieces of a desperate plan forming. Unless... Hanno, could some of your people get close to Boston without being seen? Watch the city, gather information. Yes, we have scouts who've observed colonial settlements for years. What do you need? I need to know where Blackwood keeps his most secret records. Where he stores artifacts from destroyed settlements, where he plans his operations. And I need to find out if there's any truth to this idea that he's holding captured children. Elias turned to Vale. How fast can your ship get back to Boston? 3 days with good wind. But if we return, Blackwood's men will arrest us on sight. Not if you return alone, claiming you were tricked. Tell Blackwood that we abandoned ship somewhere up the coast, that you came back because you realized you'd been manipulated by a senile professor and a hysterical orphan woman. Elias managed a thin smile. It won't be hard for him to believe. He already thinks I'm past my usefulness. You want me to play spy? Vale looked skeptical. I want you to get close enough to find your daughter. If she's alive, if Blackwood has her and other children locked away somewhere, that's our proof. Living children who can testify to being kidnapped, who can speak the hidden people's language, who can't be dismissed as artifacts or forgeries. And if I'm caught, then we've lost nothing we weren't going to lose anyway. But if you succeed... Elias let the possibility hang in the air. Vale looked at Martha, who was watching him with those ancient eyes. He thought of his own daughter, lost somewhere in Blackwood's web of lies and violence. He thought of his late wife's grief, the way she'd withered after Annie's disappearance, the light gone from her eyes. All right, he said finally. I'll do it. But I'll need help, someone who knows the Order's operations, who can guide me. Samuel Graves, Sarah said. If he's genuine about betraying the Order, he should be able to tell you where to look. And if he's not genuine, I'll kill him, Vale said flatly. After I make him tell me what he knows. Vale's ship departed the next morning, the captain carrying letters from Elias that deliberately painted a picture of a desperate old man clinging to delusional theories. If Blackwood intercepted the letters, they would only confirm his assumptions. Meanwhile, Elias threw himself into documenting everything he could about New Carthaginian. He spent 18-hour days in the library, copying key texts, sketching artifacts, interviewing elders about their history. Sarah worked with the settlement's healers, learning their medical techniques and recording procedures that wouldn't be known in Europe for generations. Martha began the painful process of telling her full story to the Council of Elders, recounting in detail what had happened to her settlement. How the men in dark robes had come in the night. How they'd systematically murdered everyone they found. How she'd hidden in a secret space beneath her family's home and listened to her parents die above her. They were looking for something, Martha said in her improving English, speaking to Elias one evening as they sat by the settlement's central fountain. Not just killing. Searching. They tore apart our library, took our oldest books. They were looking for something specific. Do you know what? Martha frowned, trying to find words. Old story. About first ships that came from Carthage. About what they brought with them. Special knowledge. Secret knowledge. The dark men wanted it very badly. What kind of knowledge? I don't know. Elders never told children. But I heard them talking sometimes. About something hidden. Something that would change everything if outsiders knew. Elias felt a chill run down his spine. What secret could be so dangerous that Blackwood would commit genocide to possess it? He brought the question to Hanno and the Council of Elders. For a long moment, they were silent, exchanging glances that spoke of long-held secrets and difficult decisions. Finally, Elder Sophonisba spoke. Hanno translated, his voice heavy. When our ancestors fled Carthage, they brought more than books and knowledge. They brought a map. A map of what? Of the world as it truly was. Carthage was a maritime power, Dr. Thornbury. Our ships sailed everywhere, around Africa, across the Atlantic, to lands that Romans never dreamed of. We mapped it all. And when Rome destroyed us, our navigators brought those maps west, to preserve them. Maps showing Carthaginian contact with the Americas, Elias breathed. Physical proof of pre-Columbian exploration. More than that. The maps show other civilizations too. Advanced societies in Africa, Asia, the Americas, all connected by trade routes, all in contact with each other. The world wasn't isolated, Dr. Thornbury. It was interconnected. And then Rome came, and the Dark Ages fell, and Europe forgot. But we remembered. Where are these maps now? Hidden. Divided among our settlements for safety. The main sections are here, in our deepest vault. But key pieces were, in the settlements Blackwood destroyed. Elias felt sick understanding. He's not just trying to erase your people. He's trying to collect the complete map. To possess the proof of ancient global civilization, and then destroy it so no one else ever knows. Yes. And if he takes New Carthaginian, he'll have it all. The complete picture of a world that existed before the Europeans decided they'd discovered everything. Hanno's expression was bleak. He'll burn it, of course. Can't have evidence that contradicts divine manifest destiny. Then we have to stop him. We have to. A shout interrupted him. One of the settlement scouts came running through the streets, calling in rapid Punic. Hanno's face went pale as he listened. What is it? Elias demanded. British ships. 3 of them, sailing along the coast toward us. They're searching for something. For us. The settlement mobilized with practiced efficiency. Within an hour, the most valuable texts and artifacts were being moved to hidden caves in the mountains. Children and elderly were evacuated to fallback positions. The 200 defenders took up positions at the valley's entrance, ready to buy time for the evacuation if needed. Elias stood with Hanno on the walls, watching the British ships through a telescope. They were moving slowly, methodically searching every inlet and cove. This is wrong, Elias said. British military shouldn't be involved in Blackwood's private war. He's manipulated them somehow, made them think they're searching for something else. Does it matter? They'll find us eventually. And when they do, they'll report to their commanders, and those commanders will report to people in the order. Within days, Blackwood will know exactly where we are. Then we have to convince the British they're being misled. If we can get a message to the ship's captain, explain what's really happening, they'll think we're enemy agents. We speak English with accents, we live in an uncharted settlement, we have no legal standing in the colonies. Why would they believe us over a respected reverend? Because, said a new voice, I can vouch for you. They turned to find Samuel Graves emerging from one of the settlement's passages, soaking wet and exhausted. Behind him, supported by two of the Hidden People's scouts, was Captain Vale. How did you? Elias began. Vale's crew spotted the British ships coming. Knew they couldn't outrun them, so he dove overboard and swam to shore. I was on the Esperanza when it happened, had rejoined Vale in Boston like we planned. We both made it here ahead of the British search. Graves was breathing hard. And I have news. Bad news. Worse than British warships hunting us. Yes. Blackwood knows exactly where New Carthaginian is. I gave him the information 3 weeks ago, remember? He's already sent that information to colonial authorities and the British military, claiming this settlement is a French spy operation. That's why the ships are here, they think they're rooting out enemy agents who threaten British colonial security. Can you convince them otherwise? Elias asked. I can try. I was a ship's navigator before joining the order. I know some of the officers in His Majesty's Navy. If I can get aboard, talk to the captain, explain that Blackwood manipulated them. Graves shook his head. It's a long shot. But it's better than watching those cannons blow this place apart. I'm coming with you, Elias said. I'm a Harvard professor. That carries some weight, even with the British military. You're a Harvard professor who's been declared mentally unfit by one of Boston's most influential ministers, Graves countered. Your presence might hurt more than help. Then I'll go, Vale said. He was shivering, his clothes soaked, but his expression was determined. I'm just a merchant captain. No politics, no complications. I can say I got caught up in some colonial dispute I don't understand, and I'm just trying to get home to my family. You'll also need a member of our people, Hanno said. Someone who can speak for the Hidden People, show the British that we're not French agents but a peaceful community. They'll arrest any of your people on sight, Graves objected. Not if that person is a child. Martha stepped forward from where she'd been listening at the edge of the gathered crowd. She spoke in clear English, each word carefully chosen. I go. I show them I am real. That my people are real. That we are not enemies. Absolutely not, Sarah said immediately. Martha, you've been through enough. I won't let you put yourself at risk again. I must, Martha said simply. My people die because no one believes. British captain will believe child. Children don't lie about important things. There was truth in that, and everyone knew it. A child's testimony carried a unique weight, an innocence that made deception seem unlikely. I'll protect her with my life, Vale said quietly. As if she were my own Annie. Elder Sophonisba spoke in Punic, her ancient voice firm. Hanno translated, she says Martha is right. The child has suffered most, lost most. She has earned the right to speak for her people. And if the British won't listen to a child's truth, then they deserve whatever darkness comes from their blindness. They approached the British ships in one of the hidden people's boats, white flag clearly visible. Vale rowed while Graves and Martha sat in the middle, and Elias tried to look non-threatening in the stern. The lead British ship was HMS Stalwart, a 40-gun frigate that could reduce New Carthaginian to rubble within an hour. Soldiers lined the rails, muskets pointed down at the small boat. An officer called out, demanding they identify themselves. "Captain Marcus Vale of the merchant vessel Esperanza." Vale shouted back, "Requesting permission to speak with your captain on urgent matters affecting His Majesty's interests in the colonies." There was a brief consultation among the officers on deck, then a rope ladder was dropped. They climbed up one by one, Vale first, then Graves, then Elias helping Martha, whose small hands gripped the ropes with white-knuckled determination. On deck, they were immediately surrounded by Marines with fixed bayonets. The ship's captain approached, a man in his 50s with the weathered face of someone who'd spent decades at sea. His uniform was immaculate, his bearing that of professional naval authority. "I'm Captain Richard Morrison," he said crisply. "You have approximately 5 minutes to explain why I shouldn't arrest all of you as French collaborators." "Because we're not French collaborators," Graves said immediately. "We're British subjects caught in a colonial religious dispute that's been misrepresented to His Majesty's Navy as a matter of military security." Morrison's eyes narrowed. "Explain." "The settlement in that valley, New Carthaginian, isn't a French spy operation. It's a civilian community that's been living here peacefully for generations. A powerful Boston minister named Josiah Blackwood has convinced colonial authorities they're a threat because their existence challenges certain religious and political narratives he wants to protect. That's an extraordinary claim requiring extraordinary evidence." "We have evidence," Elias said, stepping forward. "My name is Dr. Elias Thornbury, Professor of Linguistics and Antiquities at Harvard University. I can prove that the people in that settlement are descendants of an ancient Mediterranean civilization that reached America nearly 2,000 years ago. They speak Punic, the language of Carthage. They possess libraries full of knowledge from the ancient world. They are archaeologically and historically invaluable." Morrison looked skeptical. "You expect me to believe that ancient Carthaginians somehow crossed the Atlantic and established a settlement that no one's ever documented?" "Yes, because it's true. And I can prove it." Elias pulled out the coins Vale had given him weeks ago, the ones from Martha's belongings. "These are Carthaginian coins from 146 BC, showing ships sailing west. Physical evidence of ancient transoceanic contact." Morrison examined the coins briefly, then handed them back. "These could be forgeries. Planted to support your wild theory." "I'm not a forgery," Martha said quietly. Morrison looked down at her, seeming to notice her fully for the first time. "What?" "I am from that settlement," Martha said, her English now good enough to be understood. "I speak the language of ancient Carthage because my family spoke it. My mother spoke it. My father spoke it. They died when dark men came and killed them, but I escaped. I am real. My people are real. We are not French. We are not spies. We just want to live in peace." Something in Morrison's expression shifted. He knelt down to Martha's eye level. "What's your name, child?" "Martha. But my real name, in my language, is Marta Bat Yitro. Daughter of Yitro. He was a fisherman. He sang me songs in the old language. He told me stories about the first ships that came from the burning city across the sea." Tears welled in her eyes. "And then men in dark robes killed him. Killed everyone. and I had to hide and be silent and listen to my mother scream. Morrison's face had gone very still. How old are you? 12 years. And you speak this ancient language fluently? Not just a few words someone taught you. I speak it like you speak English, because it is my first language. Do you want me to prove it? I can recite poetry from our books. I can sing songs my grandmother taught me. I can write the letters of our alphabet. Martha's voice was steady despite the tears on her cheeks. Or I can just tell you the truth, which is that powerful men want to kill my people and destroy our history because it scares them. And you can choose to help those murderers, or you can choose to protect innocent people. Morrison stood slowly, looking deeply troubled. He turned to his first officer. Lieutenant Davis, bring the intelligence briefing we received from Colonial Command about this operation. The lieutenant hurried to the captain's cabin and returned with a sealed document. Morrison broke the seal and read, his frown deepening with each line. This briefing claims we're investigating a French military outpost supporting enemy operations in the colonies. It says the settlement is armed and dangerous, populated by foreign agents. He looked up at Graves. You're saying this is false? Completely. The settlement is civilians, farmers, craftsmen, scholars. They have some weapons for hunting and defense, but they're not a military threat to anyone. Reverend Blackwood fabricated this story to get British military support for what amounts to his private vendetta. Why would a minister have a private vendetta against an ancient settlement? Because they prove his worldview is built on lies, Elias said. Because European claims of discovering and civilizing a new world fall apart if there were already advanced civilizations here. Because truth is dangerous to people whose power depends on controlling historical narratives. Morrison was quiet for a long moment, studying each of them in turn. Finally, he looked at Martha again. If I send men to examine this settlement, will they find what you claim? A peaceful civilian community with ancient libraries and artifacts. Yes, Martha said simply. And if I discover you've lied to me, if this is some elaborate deception, then you may do as you wish. But I don't lie. My people don't lie. We have hidden, yes, because we had to survive. But we don't lie. Morrison made his decision. Lieutenant Davis, prepare a landing party. 20 Marines, armed but not in aggressive formation. We're going to investigate these claims personally. He looked at Elias and the others. You'll accompany us. And if I find you've misled His Majesty's Navy in any way, you'll hang for treason. The landing party's visit to New Carthaginian lasted 3 hours. Morrison and his officers walked through the settlement in stunned silence, examining buildings that shouldn't exist, listening to people speak a language that should be dead, handling artifacts that contradicted everything they'd been taught about history. In the library, Morrison stood before shelves of ancient texts while Elias translated passages, proving they were genuine scientific and philosophical works from the classical world. A Royal Navy surgeon examined medical texts with mounting amazement, recognizing techniques he'd never seen but could immediately understand. This changes everything, Morrison said finally. He looked at Hanno, who'd been serving as guide and translator. Your people have lived here for how long? Nearly 1800 years, Hanno replied through Elias's translation. Our ancestors fled Carthage when Rome destroyed it. They sailed west and found this land. They built their homes, raised their children, preserved their knowledge. We've been here ever since. And this Reverend Blackwood wants to destroy you. Yes. He leads an organization called the Order of New Canaan. They've already destroyed 7 of our sister settlements. Nearly 1,000 people murdered, their homes burned, their artifacts stolen or destroyed. We're one of the last surviving communities." Morrison's jaw clenched. "And I nearly helped him. Christ, I nearly brought British cannons to bear on civilians. On children." He turned to his first officer. "Davis, I want a full report prepared for the Admiralty. Include everything we've seen, with my strongest recommendation that these people be afforded protection under the Crown. They're subjects of His Majesty whether they've been officially recognized or not, and they're under threat from colonial extremists. Sir, that will take time. And if what they say about Blackwood's plans is true, he could attack within weeks. Then we'll provide security until official protection arrives. I'm keeping the Stalwart and her sister ships here. No one attacks this settlement while ships of the Royal Navy stand guard." Elias felt relief flood through him, followed immediately by renewed concern. "Captain Morrison, there's more. We believe Blackwood has been kidnapping children, both from the hidden settlements and from colonial families. Children who might know too much or have heard too many stories. We think they're being held somewhere. What evidence do you have?" Vale stepped forward. "My daughter, Annie, was taken from our home in Boston 6 months ago. No ransom, no explanation. I've been searching ever since. If Blackwood's people took her because I told her stories about hidden settlements, if she's alive somewhere, I need to find her." Morrison's expression was grim. "Kidnapping is a hanging offense. If these accusations are true, this Blackwood is a monster, not a minister." He looked at Graves. "You said you were part of this order. Would you know where kidnapped children might be held?" Graves hesitated, then nodded slowly. "There's a place. An old estate outside Boston, abandoned for years. The order uses it for meetings, for storing artifacts from destroyed settlements. I was only there once, but I remember there were locked rooms in the basement. Rooms I wasn't allowed to enter. At the time, I thought they were just storing sensitive documents. But if they were holding children, then we need to investigate immediately," Morrison said. "Mr. Vale, Mr. Graves, you'll come with me back to Boston. We'll visit this estate with Royal Marine support. If we find imprisoned children, we'll free them and arrest everyone involved. Dr. Thornbury, you'll stay here with the settlement to continue documenting their history. I want a full academic report to support my military assessment." "Thank you, Captain," Elias said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for listening. For believing." Morrison looked at Martha, who'd stayed close to Elias throughout the visit. "Don't thank me, Professor. Thank this brave young lady. If not for her, I'd have followed my orders blindly and destroyed something irreplaceable." He knelt again before Martha. "I'm sorry for what happened to your family. And I promise you, His Majesty's Navy will see justice done." Martha touched his shoulder gently, a gesture of forgiveness that seemed far too mature for a 12-year-old. "Thank you for choosing truth over lies," she said. "My mother would say that is the hardest choice, but the most important one." The trip back to Boston took 5 days. Morrison pushed his ships hard, driven by the urgency of possibly imprisoned children and the need to stop Blackwood before he could mobilize his planned assault. Vale stood at the rail of the Stalwart, watching the coastline slip past, his hands white-knuckled with hope and fear. His Annie might be alive. She might be suffering in some dark basement, waiting for rescue. Or she might be dead, and he'd never know what happened to her. Graves found him there as the sun set on the 4th day, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. "We'll find her," Graves said quietly. "If she's there, if she's alive, we'll get her out. And if she's not, then at least you'll know." and Blackwood will answer for what he's done." Vale turned to look at him. "Why did you really turn on the order? The story about your daughter was touching, but I've been around liars long enough to know when someone's holding back part of the truth." Graves was quiet for a moment, staring out at the darkening water. "My daughter did die. That part was true. But what I didn't tell you was how she died. She found an artifact from one of the hidden settlements, a small carved stone with Punic writing. She was so excited, wanted to show me, wanted to know what it meant. I told her it was nothing, that she should forget about it. But she wouldn't let it go. She kept asking questions, kept pushing." He paused, his voice becoming strained. "Blackwood found out. Came to our house one night, said the child knew too much, had seen too much. Said she was a liability. I thought he meant we should move away, change our names. I didn't realize." He stopped, unable to continue. "He killed her," Vale said flatly. "Made it look like fever. But I saw the marks on her body, knew they weren't natural. And when I confronted him, he looked me in the eye and said sometimes sacrifices must be made for the greater good. That my daughter's death protected the Order's mission. That I should be honored she served such a noble purpose." Graves's hands were shaking. "That's when I knew I hadn't been serving God or truth or anything righteous. I'd been serving a monster who murdered children to protect lies." "Then let's go make him pay," Vale said. Boston Harbor appeared on the morning of the 6th day, the city's church spires rising above the morning mist like accusatory fingers pointing skyward. Morrison ordered his ships to make a show of their arrival, flags flying, guns run out in plain view. He wanted Blackwood and his allies to see that the Royal Navy had taken an interest in colonial affairs. They docked at Long Wharf to the surprise and concern of British authorities. News of the warship's presence spread through the city within hours. By afternoon, Reverend Josiah Blackwood himself appeared at the docks, his black robes pristine, his expression one of confused concern. "Captain Morrison," he said warmly, extending his hand. "What an unexpected pleasure. I trust your mission to root out the French spy operation was successful." Morrison ignored the offered hand. "There was no French spy operation, Reverend. There was, however, a civilian settlement of British subjects that you deliberately misrepresented to colonial and military authorities." Blackwood's smile faltered slightly. "I'm afraid I don't understand." "Don't you? Then let me clarify. The settlement at New Carthaginian is not a military threat. It's a historical and archaeological treasure inhabited by peaceful people whose only crime is existing in a way that contradicts your preferred version of history." Morrison's voice was cold. "You lied to His Majesty's government, Reverend. You manipulated military resources for your personal agenda. That borders on treason. This is absurd. I have documentation, witness testimony. You have fabrications. I have physical evidence, academic expertise, and the testimony of survivors of your organization's attacks, including a 12-year-old girl who watched your people murder her family." Morrison gestured, and Marines appeared, flanking Blackwood. "Now, we're going to visit a certain estate outside the city. And you're going to come with us and explain why the Order of New Canaan has locked rooms in that estate's basement." Blackwood's mask finally cracked. Fury flashed across his face, quickly suppressed but not quickly enough. "You have no authority to arrest me. I'm a minister of the Church, protected by. I'm a captain of His Majesty's Royal Navy investigating threats to Crown interests. I have all the authority I need. Now, you can come quietly, or my Marines can make it less comfortable." Your choice. The estate sat on 5 acres of overgrown land an hour's ride from Boston's center. Once grand, it had fallen into disrepair, its windows dark, its gardens choked with weeds. But recent tracks in the mud showed regular traffic despite its abandoned appearance. Morrison brought 40 Marines and left 20 more guarding Blackwood in a wagon. They approached the main house with weapons ready, but found it apparently empty. Dust covered the furniture, cobwebs hung from the chandeliers. It looked exactly like an abandoned property should look. Basement, Graves said, pointing to a door beneath the main staircase. The locked rooms are down there. The basement stairs descended into darkness. Marines lit torches, and the flickering light revealed a long hallway with multiple doors on each side. Most were open, revealing storage rooms filled with crates and furniture. But 3 doors at the end of the hallway were locked with heavy padlocks. "Break them open," Morrison ordered. The first door revealed a storeroom filled with artifacts, Carthaginian pottery, ancient weapons, scrolls in sealed containers. Stolen treasures from destroyed settlements, hoarded like dragons' gold. The second door opened onto a makeshift archive, shelves of documents detailing the Order's operations, lists of settlements destroyed, names of members across the colonies. Evidence of decades of systematic genocide. The third door was different. As the Marines broke the padlock, Vale pushed forward, his heart hammering. The door swung open to reveal not a storage room but a living space, crude but functional. Beds lined the walls. A table held remnants of a recent meal. And in the corner, huddled together in fear of the armed men suddenly flooding their prison, were 7 children. They ranged in age from perhaps 6 to 14, thin and dirty but alive. And when they saw strangers, they began to cry out, not in English, but in Punic. The same ancient language Martha spoke. "Children of the hidden people," Graves whispered. He was holding survivors. Studying them, maybe. Trying to learn their language to help hunt the remaining settlements. Vale was already moving among the children, searching faces, speaking softly. And then he stopped, frozen, before a girl of about 9 with dark hair and her mother's eyes. "Annie?" His voice cracked. "Annie, baby, is that you?" The girl stared at him for a moment, confusion in her eyes. Then recognition bloomed, and she launched herself forward. "Papa! Papa, you found me. I knew you'd find me." Vale collapsed to his knees, gathering his daughter in his arms, sobbing with relief and rage and joy all tangled together. The other children watched with desperate hope. If one father had come, perhaps theirs would too. Morrison knelt beside the children, his voice gentle. "You're safe now. All of you are safe. Can any of you speak English?" One older boy, perhaps 13, nodded hesitantly. "Some English, yes. They taught us, the dark men. Wanted us to translate our language. We refused, so they hurt us. But we refused. What's your name, son?" "Hamilcar." "My family, do you know if they live? The dark men came to our village, and I ran, but I don't know if—" His voice broke. Morrison looked at Graves, who shook his head slightly. The settlement these children came from was one of the ones destroyed. Their families were gone. "We're going to take you somewhere safe," Morrison said, not answering the question directly. "Somewhere with people who speak your language, who can help you. Would you like that?" The children nodded, clinging to each other. They'd survived horrors no child should face, and now they were being offered hope they'd almost forgotten existed. Upstairs, in the fading light of evening, Captain Morrison confronted Reverend Josiah Blackwood with the evidence of his crimes spread before them, the stolen artifacts, the documentation of genocide, the imprisoned children now freed and being tended by the ship's surgeon. "You're finished," Morrison said flatly. "The Crown will see you hang for this." Blackwood laughed, a bitter sound. "Will they?" "I'm a minister of the church with connections throughout the colonial government. I'm protected by powerful men who share my vision for these colonies. You're a military captain with some wild story about ancient Carthaginians and secret societies. Who do you think they'll believe?" "They'll believe 7 rescued children who can testify to being kidnapped and imprisoned. They'll believe documented evidence of your organization's crimes. They'll believe a Harvard professor's academic analysis of a civilization you tried to erase. Thornbury is senile. Everyone knows it. His testimony will be dismissed." "And the children? Are they senile too? Is the settlement itself, with 3,000 living people and libraries full of ancient texts, just senility?" Blackwood's expression hardened. "You don't understand what's at stake. The colonies are built on the idea of divine providence, of God granting Europeans dominion over a new world. If people learn that there were already advanced civilizations here, that we're not divinely chosen but merely late arrivals, it threatens everything. The social order, the religious structure, the very justification for our presence here. So you murder innocents to protect a comfortable lie." "I protect civilization." "Do you have any idea what chaos would result if the common people learned that history is more complex than they've been taught? That religious authorities have been wrong about fundamental truths? It would undermine every institution we've built. Perhaps those institutions deserve to be undermined if they're built on mass graves and burned libraries." Blackwood lunged forward suddenly, his hands reaching for Morrison's throat. But Marines grabbed him, forcing him back. The Reverend struggled in their grip, his carefully maintained mask of piety completely shattered, revealing the fanatic beneath. "You think you've won," he snarled. "The Order has members everywhere, magistrates, governors, military commanders. Even if you take me, others will continue the work. The hidden people will be erased. Their settlements will burn. History will be written the way it should be written, the way that serves God's plan. The only thing being erased today is your freedom," Morrison said coldly. "Marines, take him to the brig. He'll face trial for kidnapping, conspiracy, and murder." As Blackwood was dragged away, still railing about divine destiny and necessary sacrifices, Fail approached Morrison with Annie clutched in his arms. "Thank you, Captain. Thank you for believing us, for acting quickly. If we'd waited even a few more days..." He couldn't finish the thought. "Don't thank me. Thank an old professor who wouldn't let go of truth, a brave girl who survived horror to tell her story, and your own stubborn determination to find your daughter." Morrison looked tired suddenly, the weight of what they'd uncovered pressing down on him. "But this isn't over. Blackwood was right about one thing: the Order has deep roots. Arresting him won't destroy the organization. What do we do about that? We bring everything into the light. No more secrets, no more hidden history. We publish Dr. Thornbury's findings, we bring the children's testimony before magistrates, we expose the Order's crimes so publicly that even their powerful members can't suppress it." Morrison's expression was grim but determined. "Truth is going to be very uncomfortable for a lot of people. But it's still truth, and it deserves to be told." The return voyage to New Carthaginian took on the character of a triumphant procession. The Stalwart and her sister ships carried not only Morrison and his Marines but also the 7 freed children, crates of recovered artifacts, and Vale with his daughter Annie safely in his arms. When they arrived at the hidden valley, Martha was waiting on the shore with Elias and Sarah. The moment she saw the other children being helped from the boats, she began crying and laughing at once, calling out in Punic. The reunion that followed was bittersweet. The freed children spoke of families lost, homes destroyed, months of imprisonment and fear. But they also spoke of resistance, how they'd refused to fully translate their language, how they'd told lies mixed with truth to mislead their captors, how they'd kept their culture alive through secret songs and whispered stories. Hamilcar, the oldest, approached Elias with careful formality. "You are the keeper of old words," he said in accented English. "Martha told us. She said you believed when others didn't, helped when others wouldn't. My people thank you." "I only did what any scholar should do when confronted with truth," Elias said, moved by the boy's dignity. "Your people are remarkable. Your history is remarkable. The world needs to know both. Will they believe? Or will more like the dark Reverend try to silence us? Some will try. But now you have allies, Captain Morrison, the Royal Navy, people throughout the colonies who value truth over comfortable myths. You're not alone anymore." Elder Sophonisba called a gathering that evening in the settlement's central plaza. The entire population of New Carthaginian came, along with Morrison and his officers, the freed children, and the small group of outsiders who'd helped bring truth to light. She spoke in Punic, Hanno translating for the English speakers. "For 18 centuries, we have hidden. We have lived in shadows, preserving our knowledge but afraid to share it. We told ourselves we were protecting truth until the world was ready. But perhaps we were simply afraid." She paused, looking at Martha and the other children who'd suffered so much. "These children have shown us that hiding is not enough. That silence in the face of evil is its own kind of evil. The Dark Ones came for us because we remained separate, because we let the world forget we existed. But perhaps if we had spoken sooner, shared our knowledge sooner, built bridges instead of walls." Her voice strengthened. "From this day forward, New Carthaginian will no longer hide. We will open our libraries to scholars like Dr. Thornbury. We will teach our language to those who wish to learn. We will share the knowledge we've preserved for 2 millennia. And yes, some will reject us. Some will call us frauds or devils. But truth does not need universal acceptance to remain truth." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Elias found himself crying, thinking of his late wife Eleanor. He'd finally done it, found one truth worth everything and told it to the world, just as he'd promised. 3 months later, Elias stood in Harvard's main lecture hall, facing an audience that included not only students and faculty but also colonial officials, church leaders, journalists, and curious citizens. Word had spread about his discoveries, and controversy had followed. Some called him a charlatan. Others declared him a heretic. But enough people were curious, hungry for truth, for history that was more complex and fascinating than the sanitized versions they'd been taught. He began simply. In 146 BC, Rome destroyed the city of Carthage in an act of genocidal violence so complete that ancient historians claimed they sowed the ruins with salt. But some Carthaginians escaped. They sailed west, across an ocean the Romans believed couldn't be crossed, and they found land. And they survived. He paused, letting that sink in. For nearly 2,000 years, descendants of those refugees have lived in hidden settlements along this coast, preserving the knowledge and culture of the ancient world. They've maintained libraries containing texts that were lost in the Dark Ages. They've continued scientific and medical research that won't be matched in Europe for centuries. They've built a living civilization that proves human history is far more interconnected and complex than we've been taught. Thomas Winthorpe stood suddenly from his seat in the front row. "This is fantasy. You have no proof beyond some coins that could easily be forgeries and the testimony of children who've clearly been coached. Elias smiled slightly. Actually, Thomas, I have quite a bit more than that. He gestured to the back of the hall, where doors opened to admit Martha, Hamilcar, and 5 other children of the hidden people, accompanied by Hanno and 2 other scholars from New Carthaginian. I have 7 children who speak fluent Punic, a language that's been dead for 2,000 years. I have native speakers of that language who can translate and teach. I have artifacts recovered from a living settlement. I have medical texts describing procedures that our own doctors can verify. And most importantly, I have the testimony of Captain Morrison of His Majesty's Royal Navy, who has submitted a formal report to the Admiralty recommending that the hidden people be recognized as British subjects and granted official protection. He looked directly at Thomas. The question isn't whether these people exist, that's established fact now. The question is why so many powerful individuals have tried so desperately to deny that fact. What are they afraid of? From the back of the hall, a familiar voice called out. They're afraid of truth that contradicts comfortable lies. Samuel Graves pushed through the crowd, followed by Sarah Hartley and Captain Vale with his daughter. Behind them, in chains and under marine guard, came Reverend Josiah Blackwood. Morrison had arranged for Blackwood to be present at the lecture as part of his public trial. The Reverend's fall had been spectacular. Not only had he been arrested for kidnapping and conspiracy, but the documentation found in the estate basement had implicated dozens of other order members. The colonial government was in turmoil, with magistrates and officials scrambling to distance themselves from the scandal. Reverend Blackwood, Elias said quietly, "Would you like to tell these people why you tried to erase the hidden people from history?" Blackwood remained silent, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. "Then I'll tell them. You tried to erase them because their existence proves that European colonization wasn't the divinely ordained bringing of civilization to savages. It proves that advanced societies already existed here, that we're not discoverers but destroyers, not founders but conquerors. And that truth threatens the entire justification for colonial expansion." He turned back to his audience. History isn't a simple story of progress from primitive to civilized. It's a complex tapestry of civilizations rising and falling, knowledge preserved and lost, connections between cultures that we're only beginning to understand. The hidden people are proof of that complexity. And they deserve to be part of our historical record, not erased from it to protect comfortable myths. Martha stepped forward, her small voice somehow carrying through the hall. "My mother died because powerful men feared truth. My father died. My grandparents, my friends, my whole village, dead because we proved something people didn't want to believe." She looked around the hall, meeting eyes. "But I am alive. We are alive. And we will not be silent anymore." The hall erupted, some in applause, others in angry denial, still others in shocked recognition of truths they'd sensed but never articulated. Elias let the chaos wash over him, feeling a profound sense of completion. He'd done what Eleanor asked. He'd found one truth worth everything and told it to the world. Whether the world accepted it or not was no longer his concern. 6 months later, Elias sat in his rebuilt library. Harvard had finally acknowledged his work, providing funds to replace the books Blackwood had stolen and even to acquire new materials. His position was secure now, his theories vindicated, his reputation transformed from senile relic to a visionary scholar. But he rarely used the library these days. Instead, he spent most of his time at New Carthaginian, working with Hanno and the other scholars to catalogue and translate their remarkable collection. Students came from Harvard and other institutions, eager to learn Punic, to study these texts, to understand this living link to the ancient world. The hidden people had become a sensation. Some viewed them with suspicion or hostility, but many more were fascinated by their culture, their knowledge, their survival. The Royal Navy had officially recognized New Carthaginians as being under Crown protection, and the colonial government, chastened by the order scandal, had granted the settlement legal status and territorial rights. Sarah Hartley had established a school at the settlement, teaching both English to the hidden children and Punic to interested colonists. She'd also begun working with the settlement's healers to compile their medical knowledge into texts that could be shared with colonial doctors. Captain Vale had become the primary liaison between the settlement and Boston, using his merchant connections to facilitate trade and communication. Annie had become best friends with Martha. The two girls often found together, one teaching the other English while learning Punic in return. Samuel Graves had testified extensively at the trials of order members, his insider knowledge helping to dismantle the organization that had committed genocide in the name of protecting lies. He'd been granted clemency in exchange for his cooperation, and now worked as Morrison's liaison to the colonial authorities, helping root out remaining order sympathizers. And Reverend Josiah Blackwood had been tried, convicted, and hanged for his crimes. In his final statement, he'd remained defiant, insisting that history would vindicate him, that future generations would understand he'd been trying to protect civilization from dangerous truths. Elias doubted that. But then again, history was complex and surprising. Perhaps somewhere, centuries in the future, people would debate Blackwood's motivations and methods. But they'd do so knowing the full truth: the hidden people existed, had survived, had preserved knowledge worth preserving. Martha found him there, in his library, as evening light slanted through the windows. She was 14 now, her English nearly perfect, her trauma slowly healing into scars she could live with. "Hanno says you should come see," she said. "The new students arrive tomorrow, 20 of them from different colonies, all wanting to study our language and history." "That's wonderful," Elias said. "It is. But also strange. For so long we hid. Now we teach. Now we share. Sometimes I wonder if Elder Sophonisba is right, that we should have done this centuries ago. Or perhaps this was the right time," Elias suggested. "Perhaps the world needed to be ready. Perhaps everything that happened, the pain, the loss, the struggle, was necessary to make this moment possible." "Do you really believe that? That my mother's death, my father's death, all the suffering, that it had purpose?" Elias chose his words carefully. "I believe that suffering often lacks purpose in the moment it happens. But I also believe that we can choose to give it meaning through what we do afterward. Your people's suffering was senseless and evil. But your choice to emerge from hiding, to share your knowledge, to refuse to let fear silence you, that transforms the tragedy into something more. Not less painful, but more meaningful." Martha considered this, her ancient eyes thoughtful in her young face. "My mother used to say that darkness doesn't disappear when we speak truth, it just becomes visible. And visible darkness can be fought. Your mother was wise. She was. I miss her every day." Martha smiled slightly. "But I think she would be proud. Of me, of our people, of what we're building. A world where the old knowledge isn't buried but shared. Where history isn't controlled by those who fear it but understood by those who seek it." "She would be very proud," Elias agreed. "As am I. You're the bravest person I've ever met, Martha. You survived horrors that would have broken most adults, and you used that survival to change the world. I didn't change it alone. You helped. Sarah helped. Captain Vale helped. Even Samuel Graves helped, in the end. Maybe that's the real lesson, that truth needs many voices, not just one. Elias thought of Blackwood's final words, his insistence that he'd been protecting civilization. And he thought of Martha's words now, about many voices telling many truths. "Perhaps that's it," he said. "Perhaps the most dangerous lie isn't any specific false claim about history. It's the idea that there's one simple story, one authorized version, one truth that must be protected from contradiction. The real truth is always complex, always uncomfortable, always requiring many perspectives to understand fully." Martha nodded. "Then we should keep talking. Keep sharing. Keep refusing to let anyone silence any voice." "Yes," Elias said. "We should." That evening, as stars emerged over New Carthaginian, the settlement held a ceremony to welcome the new students who would arrive the next day. The central plaza was lit with hundreds of lamps, and tables groaned under the weight of food prepared for the celebration. Martha stood with the other children who'd survived Blackwood's prisons, their voices rising together in an ancient song, a Carthaginian hymn of survival and renewal, words that had been sung for 2,000 years and would be sung for centuries more. Elias stood beside Hanno, watching the celebration with a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For trusting me. For letting an old fool help tell your story." "You're not a fool," Hanno said. "You're what our language calls a showmer, a keeper, a guardian. You kept truth safe when it was threatened. You guarded knowledge when others tried to destroy it. That's not foolishness. That's wisdom. I just did what needed to be done." "Yes. And sometimes that's all wisdom is, doing what needs to be done, even when it's difficult or dangerous or costs you everything you've built." Hanno smiled. "My ancestors did that when they fled Carthage. They gave up everything familiar and sailed into the unknown because preserving truth was worth any sacrifice. You did the same when you risked your reputation and position to help Martha. You're one of us now, Dr. Thornbury. A keeper of the old knowledge." Elias felt tears prick his eyes. Eleanor would have loved to see this. To know that the truth we both believed in finally found its voice. Perhaps she does see it. The old beliefs, the ones my people brought from Carthage, hold that those who die in service of truth become part of truth itself. Their voices join the eternal conversation, guiding those who come after. I'd like to believe that. Then believe it. Truth doesn't need certainty to be worth believing. As the celebration continued into the night, with songs in both Punic and English filling the air, with hidden people and colonists sharing food and stories, with children who'd survived darkness now dancing in the light, Elias thought about the journey that had brought him here. It had started with an impossible language spoken by a traumatized child in an asylum. It had led through betrayal and violence, through discovery and rescue, through confrontation with powerful men who preferred comfortable lies to difficult truths. And it had ended, no, not ended, continued, with a living civilization emerging from shadows, with knowledge preserved for 2 millennia now shared with the world, with voices that had been silenced now speaking freely. In 40 years of studying dead languages, he'd finally heard one begging desperately to live. And he'd helped it live. Helped it sing. Helped it tell its story to a world that needed to hear it. Martha appeared beside him, offering him a cup of the settlement's sweet wine. "Elder Sophonisba wants to thank you formally. She says you gave us something more valuable than protection or recognition. You gave us belief. When everyone else said we didn't exist, couldn't exist, shouldn't exist, you believed we did. And that belief made everything else possible. I believed because the evidence was undeniable." "No," Martha said softly. "You believed because you chose to believe. Because when you heard an impossible language, you didn't dismiss it as madness. You asked what it meant. You listened when others refused to hear. That's not just scholarship, Dr. Thornbury. That's courage. Elias raised his cup in a toast. To courage, then. To truth-telling. To the voices that refuse to be silenced. To the keepers of old words, Martha added, touching her cup to his. May they always listen. May they always hear. May they always believe. They drank together as music filled the night air, ancient melodies and modern harmonies blending, just as past and present were finally beginning to blend in this remarkable place where a 2,000-year-old civilization lived on, no longer hidden but celebrated, no longer silent but singing its truth to the world. And somewhere, Elias imagined, Eleanor was listening. And smiling. And whispering words he'd heard her say 1,000 times, some truths are worth dying for. But even better, some truths are worth living for. This was one of them. The girl who spoke a language that shouldn't exist had been told. Not the simple version, where ancient equals primitive and European equals civilized. But the true version, complex and uncomfortable and real, where ancient sometimes meant advanced, where survival required centuries of courage, where truth threatened power, and where one traumatized child's refusal to stop singing in her mother's language changed the world. It was a story that would be told and retold, debated and discussed, accepted by some and rejected by others. But it would be told. That was what mattered. Truth, once spoken, cannot be unspoken. Light, once kindled, cannot be extinguished. And voices, once heard, echo forever. Martha's voice had echoed through an asylum, calling out in a language 2,000 years dead. And the world, finally, had learned to listen.